All right. Welcome, Daniel. It's good to have you.
What's
It
up?
just
What's up,
came-
everybody?
it's good. We just wanted to record a couple of videos to talk about this new church, the Sprout Livingstone San Diego, and what's it all about? And so we got like a number of videos that we're going to try and record. And today is, the big one, vision and values, right? Actually, vision. What's the vision of the church? Sorry, values are coming. And wanted to hear a little bit about the story. And these videos are just an opportunity for people to kind of get a better sense of what's going on with, the Sprout. What's it built around? How's it going to look different? And why? And so want to hear some of your story, Daniel, both your and Cindy's story, as well as kind of get into some of the real nitty gritty type of stuff about the church. And so if you don't
Awesome.
mind, could you share yeah, a little bit about just the church planting journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I guess this started, it started, well, obviously I could go way back, but I guess maybe I will. I grew up at Chinese Bible Church, right? So, and my family was one of the founding families, I guess you could say. And so I grew up in essentially a church plant, right? I mean, not essentially, it was definitely a church plant, right? And there was like nobody, all that kind of stuff, only kids and all that. So it was a interesting, and I didn't know at that time really, because I was only like 7 years old when we started the church, but it was very formative for me, right? And so one of the things my parents always told me is that you're a church planter, you're one of the founders of this church. I remember they really put it in me, and they said you have to reach out to the other kids and that type of thing. So that kind of got in me. That kind of got in me
Yeah.
as kind of a part of my identity, really, that I kind of carried on. Obviously, fast forward, I grow up, all this stuff, and go to church. Been having some, getting to know God type of experiences and growing close to Him, meeting Him, having my life changed in many ways, and those kind of things. And but all the time, I've obviously carried. I kind of carried a little bit. Like we would talk among us, our friends, like, "Oh, what if we started our own church?" Like that was like a thing we would talk about. So because I grew up like with my parents started a church, so it
Yeah.
was not like out of the realm of possibility for us, or it wasn't something crazy.
Hmm.
So as we went along, I'm fast forward again. I went to seminary, graduated, became a pastor. We moved up to the Bay Area, Livingstone's Christian Church, and my wife Cindy. Um, I asked her, are you cool with moving out? She was saying, yeah. But then right when we landed in the Bay Area at that point, it was kind of like, she missed San Diego, right?
Yeah.
So um, that happened, and then so, but I didn't want to move immediately. Like I just started a job, so I was like, okay, let's give it, at least a few years.
Hmm.
And as time went on, we really connected really well with the church. Really became, our friends, our home, and all that stuff. And I think at least for myself, I think for both of us, it's Cindy was harder for her, definitely. We had kind of like Cindy still wanted to come back to San Diego. She was still like had been like maybe 3 years at this point or 2 years. And it was pretty obvious that San Diego was never leaving her heart. Let's just say
Hmm.
that, right? So it's like, what's going on here? How come God's not removing this? How come she's not getting more acclimated? Um, those type of things. And then so Cindy and I had to have a number of really tough conversations, right? About okay, what do we want? Where are we going? And I guess a lot of things started getting questioned. Should we be in the Bay Area, obviously, or should we be in San Diego? But not only that, but should we be should I be even be in ministry or not? Or what kind of job can I come back to here in San Diego, in ministry, not in ministry, what? And I think for me, what it came down to was, okay, well, if Cindy doesn't want to be in ministry, or if she, then she didn't say that. That's not what she was saying. But that I was kind of detecting, oh, maybe there's some of that there. Then, I'm willing to just give it up and move back to San Diego and go back to wedding photography or do whatever, right? So I told her that, and we kind of, I think, she was on the other side trying to come closer to where I was. So that's kind of where we were, and I had to start talking to my boss, Pastor Josh, about all of this honestly. Like, hey, we're struggling with this. We're thinking about going back to San Diego, and he wasn't happy about that, right? So, but he, so we kind of left it there for a little bit, and it started turning into this thing where it's like, I'm talking to Josh and then I'm talking to Cindy, and a lot of nothing is going back and forth. And I was like, Josh, I think you have to talk to Cindy directly to see where she's at. We had been we had talked about, like I said, church planting all along a little bit, but never like gotten too serious about it. But what happened was, like, I think about a year passed since I told Josh that he had to talk to Cindy, and it didn't happen. And I was like, why are you not talking to Cindy? And finally he sets the appointment with Cindy, and then we get into like a donut shop. It was, and then the first thing he says is that he feels like God is telling him, oh, maybe you should let go and just send Daniel and Cindy to San Diego to plant a church. And then I was like, what? Like, that's not really what we were I thought we were going to talk about, right? And then Cindy was like, that's exactly what I want, right? And then they started talking to each other and talking about church planting and talking about potentially planting a church in San Diego and what that would look like and all these different things. And I was just like, what's going on here? So that was kind of like my reaction. And I was like, okay, well, I've been open to church planting, and I actually Josh and I had talked a little bit about that in the very beginning before I came on to Living Stones.
Yeah.
But it hadn't really gone anywhere from there. So I hadn't really seriously thought about it. But these two people, my wife and my lead pastor, are like, oh, we're definitely doing this or something like that. That's like, they felt like they were. And then at some point in the meeting, they're like, oh, wait, Daniel, what do you think about this? And I was like, I don't know, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, I'm open to it. And I talked about it before. I prayed about it before. I thought semi-seriously about it, but not like really get down. I'm going to do this type of thing. So let me take some time to like take some steps to explore. Right. And I think around the same time, maybe a little bit before that, actually, even I was having this struggle, particularly with evangelism. And so when that conversation came up, I was like, okay, I really got to get serious about my struggle with evangelism. What is it, and how is that going? And a particular verse that I'm sure a lot of you guys hear about, especially with regards to evangelism, just kept popping into my mind, which is the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few, right? And so, like, the basic premise of it is Jesus is basically telling his disciples, there's tons of people out there to harvest, to get, but I don't have enough workers to send out. So pray and ask the Lord of the harvest to send out more workers. And to me, I was like, both elements of that is wrong. Or I felt uncomfortable or really disbelieving in kind of both elements. So the first element is, there a plentiful harvest? And I was thinking, at least in America, no, there's no plentiful harvest. Everyone I know is either already a Christian or two, they've already rejected Christianity. They've already rejected the gospel. So because of that, how is that supposed to be plentiful harvest? I don't want to tell people who've already rejected Jesus to try to convince them to like something that they already decided they don't want, right?
Mhm.
So how is that possibly considered plentiful? And then on the other side, the workers are few. I'm like, I know a lot of pastors. I know a lot of that are like looking for work, or that, that don't have a congregation or don't have anyone. How is it that the workers are few? I just don't
Mhm.
see that.
Yeah.
So I was praying over it for a few months after the conversation between Josh and Cindy and I. I think I woke up one morning, and I guess this kind of happens to me sometimes. It's just like I wake up with like a thought in my head or an image in my head, right?
Mhm.
And the image in my head was there was 4 pastors in a garage
Yeah.
in Mir Mesa. And we're praying for the lost, like really hard. And then after that, we like opened up the garage and we just went out into the neighborhoods, right?
Yeah.
To do the work. But that image didn't solve this for me. It made me like even more kind of upset, I guess, because it's like now there's like a dream of all these people working together that I thought was unrealistic, right?
Yeah.
And I really felt like I wanted that. That was like awesome. That was beautiful. Like, oh, we're all going out to do gospel work together. And what does that image mean, right? So I was like, okay, I really got to nail this down. So I actually opened up the Bible this time, which you probably should do, if you like.
It's a good idea.
Looking at something. So I looked at that verse, right? The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few.
Mhm.
Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness.
Mhm.
When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send workers into his harvest field. And so that verse is actually connected with this image beforehand of Jesus. What was he doing? He was out in the villages, in the synagogues where people were at, teaching the gospel, right? So it's like, okay, this is the gospel. This is what we're supposed to do, like preach the gospel. I don't want to preach the gospel. But then what does it say? It says healing every disease and sickness. I'm like, okay, I wish I had that power, but we don't. Right?
Mhm.
And he says, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And right after that is when Jesus said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. So when I realized, oh my goodness, when he's talking about the harvest is plentiful, he wasn't talking about the same thing I was thinking about.
Mm.
He was saying, are there people? He was looking out at people. They were all like Jewish. They were all like believers of God and all that. But he was looking at them and he was like, they are harassed and helpless. And he had compassion on them. And I felt like God was asking me, do you have compassion on the harassed and helpless? Or do you want to just do church work?
Yeah.
And I realized that what Jesus meant there was the harvest is plentiful because are there people in our day and age, in our society, in America, people that you know that are in a harassed and helpless state?
Yeah.
Like going through stuff, basically. Going through real, actual, like difficult, hard times. And I'm like, yeah, there it is, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, oh man. And then he sent them out, or he was going out to do that, and he was healing that disease and obviously physical disease and sickness, but also this was a big focus of his, right? Being their like guiding shepherd, direction in life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the real gospel.
Yeah.
That the gospel is not just about getting into heaven, but it actually had actual tangible benefit for these people.
Yeah.
That they were going to be healed of their diseases and sicknesses, that they were harassed and helpless. And it's like, oh, that's why he says the harvest is plentiful. And I was like, there are a ton of people going through that now,
Yeah. For some reason, it's so easy when we think harvest is plentiful. You just think people that don't know God, right?
Yeah.
Or just people with the label Christian or non-Christian. And you're seeing it as people who are broken versus I guess not, right? And there's plenty of people
Yeah.
to reach in that category. That's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was like super convicted. And then I
Hmm.
also realized, yeah, there actually aren't that many workers that are doing this. And
Mm.
most of the pastors that I was thinking of, maybe we teach Bible study, but are we helping the harassed and helpless? I'm not sure, you know?
Mm.
And so I was like, oh, yeah, both ends of those. I was kind of wrong about what evangelism really is.
Mm.
And so at that point, I felt like, oh, God was saying, if you have frontline gospel workers, people who want to do this type of gospel work, there'll always be plenty of work for them. And so I was like, oh, okay. After resolving that, I became like, maybe God is calling me to plant a church
Mm.
specifically about this. Cindy, Josh, and I we talked about this, and we eventually kind of settled on this idea of, yeah, preaching this type of gospel,
Mm.
the gospel to the harassed and helpless, this healing, restorative gospel to
Hmm.
people who, and not to define Christian, unchristian the same way or
Hmm.
non-Christian the same way, but people who maybe have heard the gospel,
Yeah.
but they haven't heard this gospel, right?
Mm.
So, and part of the phenomenon of that is that there are nowadays there are just a rising number of people who have actually grown up in church or had significant church experiences in their past. So they're not unfamiliar with church, unfamiliar with the gospel, but they left.
Yeah.
And there's a whole variety of reasons. Some of them are just like, oh, church is cool, but it's just not for me.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of
Uh-uh.
people like that. There's some people with like deeper hurts than that, like church has hurt me.
Yeah.
Some people with intellectual, things. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why people have left. But this group of people who have left the church, those who have left, is one of the fastest growing segments. They
Yeah.
actually say about a third, and probably even more now, because I think that survey that I was looking at is like 2015.
Oh,
But
wow. Yeah.
as of then there was like a third of Americans that are in this group. People have left
Yeah.
church,
Yeah.
and it was rising, right?
Hmm.
And so I think our vision for this church really is to reach people who have left, people who have never
Hmm.
been, and people who
Yep.
have left with
Yeah.
this healing or restorative gospel.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of like where we kind of landed, and that's how I feel like God, the story of that, and how God's kind of called us to that. Yeah,